Cat's here. He's wanting attention.
Hello, everyone. It's Michael Jacob with Unleashing Intuition Secrets. We have Marcus Kahn back with us again. It's been a little bit since he's been with us. And we have a new guest, Ron Bouchard, is a constitutional law educator, strategic interventionist, and the author of Rule of Law, A Nation of Laws, Not of Men, a landmark book that restores the original meaning of the rule of law. Drawing from maxims, constitutions, and founding documents, Ron unpacks how American governance has been hijacked by arbitrary power and how to lawfully correct it. Through compelling stories, legal precision, and step-by-step guidance, Ron teaches teens and adults alike how to reclaim their authority under the highest law of the land. His work is rooted in natural law, the U.S. and state constitutions, Vattel, and biblical principle, offering clarity in a world of legal confusion. The rule of law was never meant to be a tool of power, but a cage for government itself. And it seems like government has flipped that on us, gentlemen.
Absolutely have. Yep, that's right.
So yeah, we're gonna jump in and talk about these things. I got some really good questions here. But Marcus, you want to give us a little bit of background? I haven't, had you on for a little bit. Give us an update of what you've been up to.
Well, a lot of business stuff, but still trying to do, as you know, probably more importantly, save the world stuff. That's just why I title and tell people, what do you do? I said, well, I try to do business bring good things to solve problems for people. And I really, the save the world stuff is more important because what I tell people all the time, if God puts something in front of you, do it. And God puts relationships and he connects people and information, and I connect them with other people. And Ron being one of those people that we become friends for a while now. And when I understood what he does and how important it is, I mean, it's like fundamentally significant to everything that we do, and how we run the country. And he's exposed how corrupt the country is. And I would just say, now he's not going to say it because he's humble, but God has put him in this position, and he is not making any money on this. This is out of his following what God wants him to do in his heart. He's probably the number one subject matter expert among anybody in the country, in the world, on the U.S. Constitution, God's law, and how to apply it. And when I say that, I'm going to say that because when he starts talking, he's going to go over people's heads. We got to bring him down to our language. But he proved himself to me in a really significant way. And then I'm going to let Ron talk. But I had friends of mine, military contractors. I can't say who they are, too much about it. But they had a Middle Eastern cartel try to steal information from them. And they're under ITAR rules and all that. No one in the government were doing their jobs to step up. And these are high-end guys. These are well-connected guys. They couldn't get any movement on what was going on. And this was like national security stuff. Yeah. So I said, when I understood it, I said, guys, I'm going to introduce you to Ron, and he's going to tell you things you can do, and I bet it's going to work. I introduced them to Ron. We got on a call. Ron explained everything. They explained everything. He explained everything. They went on to Ron's website, and they did what Ron told them. As far as creating documents, it's a tool that we can all use. And they did what they needed to do. They sent it out, and they said within 1 hour of them sending it out, they got a major response from the government. I believe it was New Hampshire. And within 2 hours, the FBI was calling them up. And right now, I can tell you the bad guy is in jail or going to jail for a very long time. So I know Ron's stuff works.
Wow. And that's fantastic in this current age and day where it seems like people are obviously guilty of horrific crimes and still walk among us. Yeah, I see Ron shaking his head. So let's jump into some of that now. As former CIA and Navy Special Forces, rules of engagement was a crazy thing we all had to deal with, changing daily. Gosh, so we could have used a guy like you, Ron, to smooth that stuff out. But yeah, let's look at what the rule of law really means and what it actually doesn't.
I I think that's the most important question that we have in our country because most people misunderstand what law is. And if you don't know what law is and where it comes from, nothing else matters.
Hmm.
Because we say we're under law. Whose law? Where'd that law come from? Is it really law? And unless we understand where law comes from, everything else is moot. So there's a principle, it's called law precedes government. There's an absolute iron principle, which means government doesn't create law. Now, for 95% of the public, that's going to completely baffle them. What do you mean Congress creates laws every day? No, Congress doesn't. They enact legislation in line with law. And the moment it's not in line with law, it is no longer law. It's called non-positive law
Hmm.
and has no binding effect.
So when you have a governance like we've seen in Colorado, which is extremely corrupt, I had Peter Tickton on just like an hour ago, and we talked about some of the stuff that he was dealing with Tina Peters. And he said it was, you had to be, I said, you must have been very refined in how you dealt with that. And he says, yeah, so, we had to, deal with this government that was, corrupt, and you had to give them a little bit and take a little bit and so forth. But they were eventually able to get Tina Peters out. Uh, Now, how can a government like that, knowing that there is, rules for thee and not for me, you rules for thee and not for us. That how do we work around that? It's crazy.
Well, we have to understand where law comes from. We have to understand where power comes from.
Hmm.
And we have to understand who has all the power. And we need to restore that power. And until unless that power is restored, nothing's going to happen. So the founding fathers knew this. So let's bind down the second with the change of the Constitution so that it'll become a legalized version of the first. And that's what we have today. We have a criminal cartel at every level of government. And what I've done was I've gone back in history and I've pretty much taken what the founding fathers put in place and what the law was established and followed it forward as a chain of authority. So when did that chain break? How did it break? Who broke it? And tracked it all the way till present day. What's good news is the law hasn't changed. The law is still there. The law is unchangeable, can't be changed. Nobody in government has that authority. But what we have is a criminal cartel acting under usurpation. So, and I can prove all of those things. And I think the conclusion in law is the conclusion in law. People need to know what we are dealing with. And once you understand what we're dealing with, we can then start talking about how to fix the problem. And the problem is ignorance on both the local level of the government and the people themselves. They don't understand the founding era principles. And once you understand the founding era principles, and I see this every single time I turn on a X Spaces or any chat with any group of people speaking, they go on and on and on about things that make absolutely no difference whatsoever.
Mhm.
And what they talk about is completely ignorant of the principles of the Constitution. So I've created a framework of 12 principles that absolutely will dismantle all corrupt government.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
once you understand the 12 principles, those 12 principles then eliminate all of their nonsense because I make it in binary terms. Either law precedes government or it doesn't. So was the Constitution here before, and was the government here before the people? Was it?
Mm.
No, the people created the government. The first
Yeah.
lines of the U.S. Constitution said, "We the people do ordain and establish this Constitution."
We the people, yeah.
So we the people established the law, the supreme law of the land. So how can
They
the law
work
have
for
come
us.
first?
Yes, they work for us, not the other way around.
That's right. So that's the first principle. Law predates government. And then we have to understand what law is. And law is nothing but a rule of right. Law is a rule of right, which means it's a rule that protects a right. The only reason law exists is because we have rights that exist.
Wow.
That's it. Law is a rule of right. Whatever's contrary to the rule of right is an injury. Period.
Yeah, they've been taking away our rights for a long time, haven't they? And Marcus, if you want to jump in at any time, feel free. So the next, go ahead.
I was just going to say something kind of funny.
Yeah.
Ron and I were talking, and this was a while back, and he's laughing. I'm what laughing about. He goes, I'm arguing something. You know, AI is supposed to be so darn smart. It's all accumulative of all knowledge of all, but they think people think it's like God. So Ron goes, I'm arguing with the AI. And he goes, and I whooped it. So I go, yeah, you're pretty smart if you can beat the AI, and he did. So I thought that was kind of funny. So it does when he's talking, if you can understand and break it down in English, what he's saying, understand the basics, and then he'll get into how the program works and what we need to do. Because in my opinion, it doesn't matter that we know it. Well, that's the first step. It doesn't matter what we do with what we know. So he's going to be able to arm your audience with like how we the people get engaged. And so I just wanted to make that like clear. There's like a whole purpose for following Ron and getting involved.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I've noticed that AI is like pretty stupid too. Somebody's programming AI and it's not with the right information. So yeah. So the 5-layer legal hierarchy. This sounds fantastic. I love this. God's law, natural law, rights, maxims, and constitutions. I'll break that down for you.
Yeah, so people need to understand that the Constitution doesn't sit in a vacuum. It was based on principles or axioms of law that predated the Constitution. These were thousands of years old jurisprudence. So these are, let me actually quote what a maxim is. A maxim is so called because its dignity is chiefest and its authority the most certain, and because it's universally approved by all. These are like axioms in geometry. They're the rules of how law works. So, and they're based on what is discovered. So you have natural law at the top, comes from God. Our Declaration of Independence says on laws of nature, nature's God. If there's no laws of nature, nature's God, then we really don't have a country. Because the Declaration of Independence declares that under the powers of the earth, by the laws of nature, nature's God, we were able to do what we did. And if there's no law of nature, nature's God, no powers of the earth, then we didn't create a country, did we?
But we did. So it's
yeah,
true.
but we did. So that's how attached we are to the law of nature and nature's God. Just like gravity is gravity, whether you agree with it or not. Laws of nature are the laws of nature, whether you agree with them or not.
So like gravity meaning like Joe Biden falling downstairs constantly?
Well, gravity in general is a law of nature. Gravity in general is a law of nature, right? I mean, you can curse at gravity, you can deny gravity, jump off the bridge and find out who wins. Gravity will win. So we have the laws of nature, nature's God. Then they were turned into axioms by Coke. Sir Edward Coke created the vast majority of the maxims we currently rely on as axioms of law. And then on top of that is the Constitution. So the Constitution codified them all. So people misunderstand this all the time. When it says law of the land, it's actually talking about the common law. Common law is these maxims. These statements of truth that have been around forever, thousands of years old, that have been proven over and over again. So that's why it says supreme law of the land. If you read the Constitution, it says supreme in lower letters and then law of the land in capital letters, because law of the land meant something. And it comes from Magna Carta. So people will laugh today, it's all Magna Carta. That's not anywhere in the Constitution. Baloney, it's not. It's written in law of the land right into the Constitution. Wow. It says supreme in low letters and then law of the land in big letters. There's a reason for that. Because the Magna Carta and all of that law has been codified into the Constitution itself as the supreme law of the land. In fact, due process is sanctioned by settled maxims of law, not by legislature. So that's why we get confused. If we just understood what law was, we'd be so much better off because they couldn't violate it. Government must follow the law because the law made the government.
Ron, can you give just for illustration, like an example of a law that's a maxim of God?
So sure, there's tons of maxims of of law. One of them is, in order for there to be a right, and there needs to be an injury. I mean, in order to have a wrong, right? So you have rights, and the only reason you get to a wrong is there's an injury. So there has to be an injured party for there to be a violation of law, because law is a rule of right. We see this problem. I mean, this is, if law is a rule of right, there needed to be a right that was violated for a law to be violated.
Wow, that's brilliant, because I have a friend that talks about this, and he says that, if he ever gets pulled over for some infraction, he always asks, was somebody in danger? Was there, a problem? Did I make it unsafe or something like that? So I think that's brilliant, because he always wins, and he uses that. So what you're talking about is perfect. So what was there a wrong that was committed? So that's brilliant.
Right. And who gets to determine it? Because then I say, well, the
Yeah.
legislature created a statute. Okay, was that statute positive law? Was it in line with the laws of nature and rules of right? And if it wasn't in line with the laws of nature and rules of right, it is not law,
Wow.
no matter what they call it. And you can look at Van Horn Lessee versus Lawrence, which was a early Supreme Court um, um, decision. It says, what are legislatures? Creatures of the Constitution. They owe their existence to the Constitution. They derive their powers from the Constitution. The Constitution is the work of the will of the people themselves in their original, sovereign, and unlimited capacity. Law is the work or will of the legislature in the derivative and subordinate capacity, provided that will is in line with the law of right.
Incredible. And that's, when you look at this on a bigger term, you go back to the Code of Hammurabi. We're talking almost 4,000 years ago. We're seeing some of that in our Constitution. So these guys were really well versed. How was, I mean, a lot of them were Masons, but I would say they were the good Masons. How were they so, prescient, knowing what would work, many hundreds of years later?
They studied 600 years of human behavior in failed democracies. Before the Constitutional Convention, Thomas Jefferson lent James Madison 2 trunkfuls of books on failed democracies.
Wow.
We're not talking about 2 books, 2 trunkfuls of books.
Incredible.
He read 2 trunkfuls of books before he went into the Constitutional Convention.
Wow.
What American has read 2 trunkfuls of books in the last year? Or how about the last 50 years?
He didn't get distracted by his by the TV and the movies and the cell phones.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Good point.
And he also didn't get distracted by the opposite problem that they had in those days. In those days, you had a problem with access to information, and information was very restricted. Look in the days of Galileo. Galileo, the Catholic Church had all the power.
Yeah.
And they had all the authority. So they chained their Latin Bible to their pulpit. And Galileo built a telescope and saw something that the Bible contradicted. The Catholic doctrine contradicted. So he saw with his own eyes and then showed other people. They arrested Galileo.
Yep.
Because they didn't like what Galileo had seen with his own eyes. That's not to say that the Bible is wrong. That's to say that the Catholic doctrine that they were preaching was wrong, which deviated from the Bible. There's a difference between the Bible and the Catholic doctrine. So they were using Catholic doctrine to control men. That's what they were doing. And they were teaching Latin to their priests, so that only the priest could understand what was written in the law, in the Bible. And you needed access through a gatekeeper to get access to law. And that's exactly what's happening today, except for it's now attorneys. And attorneys aren't studying law. The problem with America is we don't have law taught in our law schools. Lawyers don't know law. And law has been stolen, which is probably the biggest scandal in American history. Law in 1935 was stolen.
Yeah.
We're not living under law.
The British accredited registry. During the War of 1812, one of the reasons why the British came in and burned the Library of Congress and the Capitol and so forth was because we were getting ready to throw that out. from my
Titles of nobility. It was the titles of nobility, men. But I have to say that when people say in modern era that it's a British accreditation registry, even though there's a history that links it, it's not the same. The modern day bar is absolutely much worse. It's much worse by magnitudes.
God.
And most of the bars in America were created by judicial decree. Think about that. So in 1949 in Florida, the Supreme Court got out and it was petitioned by the Bar Association. The Bar Association wanted the Supreme Court of Florida to integrate the bar into the judiciary. So the judiciary, who has no creation power, no legislative power, by judicial decree, said okay. And what were the reasons they gave it? Because it was good for the bar.
Wow.
And then they claimed something called inherent authority. Now, when a government agency actually says out loud, the quiet part, inherent, we've got a problem. Because inherent is the authority of kings. So they essentially crown themselves kings and then legislated from the bench a new creation of the Bar Association in Florida. And Florida is probably the actually biggest example of major corruption in America. That people don't even have a clue how bad it is. I mean, extortion, tax fraud. I have open cases on all of those particular pieces of the puzzle in Florida, because Florida is an egregious example of overreach by government. And unless we get rid of the circularity that the Bar Association creates as a Praetorian guard protecting the system and protecting circularity, and the reason I call it circularity is because they make the rules, they adjudicate the rules, and they enforce the rules in all three branches of government. You have bar agents in the executive branch of government, you have bar agents in the legislature, and you have bar agents in the judiciary, all answering to the judiciary. The founding fathers said when all three powers are confined into the judiciary, it is the absolute definition of tyranny. You wonder why nobody gets any justice today and why there's nobody being prosecuted? Because of the judiciary. They gave themselves doctrines of sovereign immunity when they're not the sovereign and they can't give themselves immunity, but they've called themselves sovereign immunity and try to challenge that in court, that you're not sovereign, you don't have immunity. Now, I can prove it, that they're not sovereign. You can prove it by their own Supreme Court rulings. Yickwo Hopkins says that they're not sovereign. Chisholm versus Georgia said they're not sovereign. But they go forth as though they're sovereign anyway. Massachusetts Constitution says they're not sovereign.
Yeah, you have those precedents where they're, basically being dimed out as not being sovereign, yet they cling to that. How do they get away with it? I have a gentleman that comes on, Mitch Vexler, and he talks about how the bond fraud, the school bond fraud in Texas is out of control. And they're doing the property taxes, which keep going up every year to an extreme, which doesn't correlate with the amount of inflation, way beyond it. So he's going after them like you're talking about. And, just like the one statement I said, the rule of law was never meant to be a tool of power, but a cage for government itself. Now, they built a cage around themselves so that we can't come at them like you're talking about. They're sovereign and we don't have the power. We don't have the rights. The rights is always supposed to be about our rights. So, wow, this is fantastic, Ron. Good job.
Yeah, it's called the Great Inversion. So everything that the founding fathers put in place to protect us, they've actually inverted. And if you look at all the protective mechanisms the Constitution gives us, there's a bar attorney standing guard at each one of them. Grand juries were always supposed to be the people's body. So you can indict and you can present. And a presentment means a grand jury of its own fruition comes up with an investigation. So a corrupt politician, they can do a presentment against a corrupt politician all on their own by the power of the people. Well, now, if you read the rule books, the jury handbooks, they've eliminated all that. In fact, Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure number 7 say, I know historically you had that right, and the Fifth Amendment says you have that right, but we're going to ignore it.
Amazing.
How do we make them unignore it?
Yeah.
Deal with it.
Well, you have to kill the circularity. And until people start speaking about the circularity and understanding who the enemy is here, the enemy is the circularity. the self-referential system that keeps itself continually in a state of treason.
Wow.
Yeah, and treason, people don't like me using the T word, but there's actually in law there's a very accurate description of what that is. So before we finish, I'd like to end with why this is treason, why what we're dealing with is treason. We should be calling it treason because it is treason, and I can prove it in law.
Very, very good. Look forward to it. So this is a good one. Why America is a constitutional republic, not a they changed this. They're like, we're a democracy. And I remember my social studies and I was like, no, that's not right. What happened here? So tell us about, how this shift happened.
Yeah, so a constitutional republic means something very specific, and it's actually defined by Montesquieu. A republican form of government is a nation of laws, not of men. So that means the rule of law came first, and the representatives represent the people, the will of the people, through the rule of law. That's a republican form of government. That's what's codified in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. So in other words, if you have a republican form of government, it's a government of pre-existing law that doesn't change. It's immutable. So you always know what to expect. In a democracy says you can vote yourself in some changes to the law. That is not true. So a democracy, what they're doing is they're turning the fixed rule of law into malleable rules that can be changed.
Kind of like my truth, your truth, huh?
Yeah. So this is Cooley. This is Cooley's constitutional limitations, and he was the in the 1800s. He was the expert on law, and Cooley's constitutional limitation says something very, very profound regarding what we're allowed to do with our law. It says, by the constitutions which they form, they tie up alike their own hands and the hands of their agencies, and neither the officers of the state nor the whole people as an aggregate are at liberty to take action in opposition to these fundamental laws, period. They don't change. You don't get to change the laws. Not only can the government not change the laws, the people can't change the law. It's fixed because it's based on reason, of centuries of reason and authority.
Which comes from God.
Yeah. You can't change gravity and you can't change reason.
Incredible. This is a great class in Constitution and law. I love it. So the 8 immutable principles that bind all government.
Well, yeah, then that was an old iteration. It's now 12. I've settled on 12. Nice. And we've already talked about one of them, law precedes government. So when we understand law precedes government, that's the first rule. Everything else hinges on whether or not we follow that first rule. The second one is rights are pre-political, which means rights come first. The Declaration of Independence says we're ordained by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They come from whom? The Creator, which causes a whole bunch of problems, because how can you have federal rights and state rights and all these other rights? You don't have rights that are federal or state. You have just rights that are unalienable. And they're good everywhere. Because God didn't give somebody in Massachusetts certain rights, and then in Georgia, he gave them a different set of rights. That's baloney. Doesn't make any sense. So our declarations of rights are universal. The frames of government are not universal. Those are two different things. Then the third one is the whole reason government exists is to secure these rights. And then all authority has to be delegated as number 4. So if you just take those 4, think about modern government. All authority has to be delegated. Government's sole end is to secure your rights. Rights are pre-political and law is a rule of right. How far have we drifted?
Quite a bit. So, I mean, you look at Roe versus Wade, which struck down, they weaseled that in, and, we're going back to God's law again. And I believe that, they usurped that and inserted the Roe versus Wade. And fortunately, President Trump, got enough Supreme Court justices that sided with God's law and the Constitution.
And see, we think that there's a discretion here for the government not to side with God's law and the Constitution. But Article 6 of the Constitution gives no such discretion. They're bound to support and defend that Constitution, period.
Yeah.
Not their opinion of the Constitution, not their will. And here's one that will also baffle people. That principle number 6 is no will, only law. In government, people think that the judges have this thing called interpretation ability. They don't. They only have declaratory ability, which means they can only declare what the law is. That's Marbury v. Madison. They declare what it says. That's it. And in State v. Post, it says a court can only declare what the law is and whether it aligns with the law of God, fundamental law, and the constitutions of society.
So, Ron, how does that break down into this ridiculous, corrupt, idiotic Supreme Court justices that just said that you can be born in the United States and become a birthright citizen just because you're born here? How does that? You just said, how does that play out in the real God's law, constitutional law?
So what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to look at what the law actually says and what the framers meant by what that law said. So what we understand about citizenship comes from the law of nations. And law of nations is codified into Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10. I don't know if you know that, but the book Law of Nations by M.D. Vattel is codified into our Constitution. And in that book, it tells you what a citizen is and what it's not. And then you have the framers of the 14th Amendment who actually told us what it means when they said what they said in the 14th Amendment. And they said, of course, this doesn't include aliens and illegal immigrants. Of course it doesn't include them.
So what is the definition of a citizen then in general?
Well, it all depends. It was natural born citizens. Natural born citizens were people who were born to citizen parents here. That's a natural born citizen, which is why Kamala Harris and why Obama, why a lot of Republicans, Mitt Romney, they can't run for president because they're not natural born citizens under that definition. In fact, one of the problems for Kamala Harris is I called her out on it. And they sent Harvard and Cornell University after me, thinking that was going to shut me up somehow. That didn't work. So I sent her an affidavit after sending her notices. And then I sent her an estoppel saying, okay, I've already given you all of the opportunity you need to show me how you're a natural born citizen. And I showed her the birth certificate of her parents, showing that she's not a natural born citizen. Therefore, she's disqualified from even being vice president. Never mind president. And then they could not spend all of their resources to use her again because they knew I had it already. So then I got a call from a certain administration about this particular document because it was going viral. So we sent them with groups of people because you never send anything individually. We used to put it online and people could sign it all around the country. So they were getting flooded with notices. Wow. Asking by what authority? Show me your authority to do X, Y, and Z, and they can't. Show me your citizenship. Show me how you're a natural born citizen under the definition of natural born citizen. She can't. Show me how that doesn't disqualify you from being president. She can't.
But did she in the system and all the people in power, they just blew that off.
Yep. And then we sent notices.
They all committed treason.
Yes. And then we sent notices to all the secretaries of state in the nation, telling them that under the law, they were responsible should they put somebody on the ballot who did not follow the procedures of the state as espoused by the state legislature. She didn't follow any. She was placed on the ballot. She didn't qualify in any particular state. So we put them on notice, letting them know. Now, the notice is not going to do anything in and of itself. It's the Constitution that gives the notice the power because it's already law. We're just pointing out, here's the law. So show me why you don't have to follow it.
Wow. So now I'm starting to see a bigger picture. How you're talking about at the end of this, we're going to talk about how so many people are treasonous. Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So another one that we have here, which is very, very intriguing, is how statutory law has been perverted and what lawful remedy looks like.
So statutory law, statutes are supposed to follow the Constitution and be made in pursuance to the Constitution and the law that we already described. So if you even look on the U.S., if you type in non-positive law in your search engine, you'll find there's such a thing called non-positive law, which then says, well, what is positive law? And if you read that, you will notice that there's a distinction because Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution gives Congress only 17 enumerated powers, period. That's it. So 17 subject matters that they can actually pass laws about. 17. Anything outside of that is by definition outside of their enumerated powers and therefore unlawful. So what they've done is they've created a non-positive law section to justify passing things that are not within the Constitution. Wow. Further than that, they're supposed to tell you in the front of the law where they have the authority to pass it. It's just called the enacting clause. So in order for a law to be valid, it has to contain the enacting clause because the enacting clause is what gives it authority because it points to the Constitution, and they're withholding the enacting clause.
Incredible. Wow.
So it's not law. What we call law in modern day is not law. It's fiat. It's made up. It's pretend.
They've usurped power and assumed power. They don't really have the authority to do that. But people follow them because they think it's real and it's binding, but in reality, it's not.
So when people follow them in these illegal laws, over time, people just believe it's part of the law of the land. That's what we've been involved with for quite some time, unfortunately. So undoing that, like you're talking about, just with Kamala Harris saying, "Hey, you're not legally, you don't have a legal option to actually run for president," and they just ignore it and keep going because they've had Obama that's been in there. That was pointed out by President Trump, and he at what was the not the lawyers, but the people, the press dinner that they had, and Obama just excoriated Trump in that dinner, and that was the last time President Trump went to one until the last one where there was a shooting, and then he left again. So so it's he pointed out, and these jackals in the press and part of the corrupt political system just shouted him down, and that's what they do with people that are pointing out truth like yourself. They just come in and they try and shout you down. So it's very, very frustrating. So what can students, parents, and patriots do right now?
So Madison said there is no cure unless there's a broad diffusion of knowledge. So the first thing we have to do is we have to understand what the founding fathers left us as our birthright. And that's why I wrote the 12 immutable principles. You don't need to learn what I've learned. All you need to know is the 12 principles. And the 12 principles alone are enough to get everyone started on, wow, they're not doing any of these principles. And my 12th principle is actually demonstrating complete chain of authority. So I'm actually teaching a class right now that teaches my students how to use notices just to get through the chain of authority. That's all we're doing. So principle 12 is the only thing we're focusing on. And we go to government and we ask them, please show me your authority from the source, from the people to modern era, and where you got that authority. And it has to follow a chain. Any link in the chain that's broken, by definition, voids their authority. So for instance, the first one is source. Did the people actually delegate this authority? Did they give it to you? Then there's law. Did they show it in the Constitution? Then there's delegation, which is where is it written or enumerated in that Constitution? Then there's due process, which is sanctioned by settled maxims, not by whatever they believe it is. Then there's jurisdiction. So due process is what they call a conditioned precedent. It has to happen first before they get jurisdiction. Before government can do anything to you, that's to be due process by settled maxims. That is a chain that everybody breaks. There's not one government agency action that is done without breaking due process. Not one.
Wow.
So jurisdiction doesn't land. There's no jurisdiction without due process. So then they have to come up with jurisdiction, then judgment, then execution, then accountability.
Fascinating. So, we're seeing this unlawful notices, affidavits, importance of record. So, as citizens, we're learning definitely through you, but we're not learning through the educational system. We're not learning through the politicians because they're conspiring to dumb us down from K all the way into the university system. It's been infiltrated by a lot of communist organizations and teachers and so forth that are purposefully dumbing us down so they can get away with these usurpations of our law.
Yes, and
they're trying to ruin our history, take away everything that you've done. They've dumbed it down. They've dumbed down our schools. They criticize the good schools that are, Christian schools or private schools. They try to discredit all that because they don't want a smart population. And that was one of the things fundamental, like Ron said, diffusion of knowledge. We have to have people able to understand the knowledge being diffused. So how do you do that? Long-term game by the communists, by Satan, really just call it what it is.
Yeah.
It's gonna dumb people down, and then they're easy to be ignorant and easy to control. And that's really what's happened. So how I see it, we gotta like wake everybody up, like shake them awake, and go, guys, hey, you're actually smarter than what you're allowing yourself to be, and let's start educating ourselves and then taking the right action.
Yeah. And getting everybody to the realization that they work for us. If we can just get to that point, that'll be huge because they have dumbed us down to the point where we feel that oh, I'm in trouble because they say I'm in trouble, or they have passed these laws and now I lose my rights, and oh well, it's because they have the power and I got to go by that. So yeah, that's something we really need to educate people on as well.
Yeah, and I think the best way of doing that is if every American just opened up the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, specifically Massachusetts, because Massachusetts was the model for all the 50 state constitutions, especially the U.S. Constitution. Massachusetts was written as the first constitution after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and it was the model for the rest, and especially the U.S. There were some that predated the Massachusetts Constitution, but not after the Declaration of Independence, because Virginia was first. And Virginia's great too. So especially the 13 original colonies, if you look at their constitutions, well, 12, because Rhode Island didn't have one. They stayed with the British Crown Charter. They didn't even have a constitution. So if you look at the Massachusetts Constitution in particular, you can't, once you read it, you can't unsee what it says. I mean, Massachusetts Constitution, Part the First, Article 5. Let me get it for you. Let me read the plain English language.
Awesome.
I'm surprised he doesn't have a committed memory.
I do, but I want to make sure. All power residing originally in the people and being derived from them. Already we've got a problem. Don't we already have a problem? The several magistrates and officers of government vested with authority, whether legislative, executive, or judicial. So who's excluded there? Are there substitutes and agents and at all times accountable to them? So where does immunity doctrine come into place when all times accountable? How can you have all times accountable and have immunity doctrine? You can't. You're either all times accountable or you're not. It's binary. And this is a right. This is not a suggestion. This is a pre-political right that is unalienable. So all power comes from the people. They are our substitution agents, not our masters. We're the masters, and they're all times accountable. I think that's a pretty powerful one, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Ron, can you, because I don't know how much time, Michael, that we got, but Ron, we got in yesterday, we were talking about some specific things, especially with child trafficking and some other real world things going on. Can you maybe explain kind of where the rubber hits the road in real world situations and things that need to be done to correct it?
Yeah, the primary issue, like I mentioned, in America right now is the circularity. So I've been fighting the circularity. It took me a long time to figure out. I look at corruption as a Jenga tower. Okay. Some things at the top of the tower are not so important, and you pull those out and they just put more on top. And I know because for 5 years I've been fighting them every single day in all 50 states. So I said, okay, I'm not going to focus on the top powers anymore. I'm going to try to pull the bottom ones out, because if we pull the bottom ones out, they all come down. Mm. And that's why I found the circularity. And the circularity is held in place by the Bar Association. If you look at all three branches of government, they all have lawyers that answer to the judiciary. That's a problem. If you look at every single mechanism we have to protect ourselves and that the founding put in place to protect ourselves, a lawyer, a bar lawyer, is there to circumvent us. So I've been going after in real time this circularity. Now, the reason why we have Child Protective Services having a problem in child trafficking is because they collapsed the law in 1935. So the Rules Enabling Act, Congress passed, gave the U.S. Supreme Court the authority to create rules for the court. But it said, if you write these rules, they can't violate rights. So there are only three parts of the law. One, you have the authority. One, two, it can't violate rights. So you can't even get to number two without them doing it. So rule number one and rule number two of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure violated rights from the get-go. And rule number two, in particular, was an egregious act. Because there were two types of law, and there were two types of law prior. There was law and there was equity. And the Constitution talks about these two things. There's law and there's equity. And they had two different procedures, two different actions, because they're very different. Equity had to follow the law, and law, we're talking about the common law. Okay? So this law that predated the government they could use equity, but it had to follow the law. Children were among protected by law because they were your biological property, fundamental liberty interests. For you to be deprived of your life, liberty, or property, you had to have due process of law. What they did was they collapsed law and equity, now giving the judge discretion, eliminating the jury and calling children equity. So now the judge comes in and calls your children equity and just makes a decision all by themselves, when that was never allowed. The jury was always supposed to be a permanent part of our court, because the people were supposed to be the check on the court. That's what a jury is for. It's to check the court. That's the only reason it's there. It's not for the defendant. It's checked to make sure justice is being done. But we've been told that it's for the defendant. So now we have plea deals. 98% of all our cases in America now are pled out. No jury in the courtroom. And 99% of all grand jury presentments or indictments are rubber stamps.
It almost seemed, Ron, that there's so many court cases going on that maybe there's not enough people in the population to be the grand juries. Maybe they did it partially out of convenience, right? Which is not an excuse, but it seems like, there's so many lawsuits and everything and violations of law, so the practicality of implementing that is partially an issue.
Well, yes, that's because they added a whole bunch of things that were not law. So they turned things that were not criminal into criminal. So now you have to